let me welcome you to the conversation this Sunday. I'm sure that you got a smile on my face, and that is because something I love to listen to, an experience I love to have again and again. I encountered in the course last week at the book launch or book presentation and lecture to celebrate the chairman of Dark Communication PLC, Aleo Dokbese. I encountered a young man, Deji Ige. The circumstance in which I met him thrilled me. He performed on stage, and the piece of work he brought on that platform energized the entire environment because he lived his art. And that afternoon threw me back to my secondary school years when my teacher would say, look, what was recited? It makes meaning, it lifts you, it transports you to where? I asked him. And my teacher would say, under the greenwood tree, who loves to lie with me and tune his merry note unto the sweet bird's throat? Oh, come hither, here shall you see no enemy but winter and rough weather. And I said, these are words. You not see an enemy except winter and rough weather? Is winter not an enemy? Is rough weather not an enemy? But the enemy counter outside, Shakespeare says, is worse than winter and rough weather. And I said to myself, bring Deji, let us converse. Deji Ige, a poet, a philosopher, you are welcome to the conversation.
Good.
Deji, how did you chance at poetry? Did you elect to do it? Did you study it? How did you come at poetry?
Okay, I never studied it. I wouldn't say I stumbled on it because I knew there was something within me. I knew I had the gift of word crafting. But how to bring that to reality, I did not know. So, the manifestation of my ability to do word crafting, I would say I stumbled upon. I wrote a few things and people said, wow, this sounds good. And at some point, I realized I had too many words within me that should go on paper. So I started putting my words on paper in a diary, and I'll close the diary. I did not have any intention for that diary or those words. Then at some point, my sister stumbled on that diary. I'd left the house for NYSC. So she called me, wow, I saw this in the house. And that was a period when I was trying to look for job. No, I'd finished NYSC. So the waiting period, I was trying to look for job to get. So I started writing. The words were just so many and I started putting them down. So by the time I left the house in search of green pasture, not outside the country anyway. So my sister stumbled on that. So she called me at some point and begged to publish one of the works in the diary. In her departmental journal. She was in the law faculty of the University of Benin then. So I said, okay, anything in that book worth publishing? She said, yes. I said, okay, please go ahead. Then my father stumbled on the same diary and told me, wow, I saw some things. And I said, what? He said, wow, you wrote those things? Wow, they are nice. So that brought my consciousness into the fact that I had the gift, but I didn't know what to do with it. I continued living my life. Then at some point, I started writing short stories. I just knew I had those words and people would say, oh my God, the way you constructed your stories. So I started putting those short stories down. Then one fateful day, I wrote a poem that was really magnificent. It was when the previous Ooni of Ife, Oba Deji Ige, died. And we heard the story of Abobaku. Abobaku means the man that must die with the king. Abubakar escaped. He did not want to die with the king. So he ran away. That was so funny to me because Abubakar, while the king, anytime the king is alive, Abubakar is like a king, well revered. He eats what the king eats. He's so respected and is in affluence. So the king died, and he was meant to die with the king, to accompany the king to the afterlife. This is the tradition in Ile-Ife. So Abubakar ran away. So they kept looking for him. I don't know if they found him till date. So that was so funny to me. And that brought words like, so I wrote Stench of Tradition. Because the opening line is Oba Oshupa on his way to the ancestors. Abubakar spotted at Semoi border, the ancient town. So that was the first poem, major poem I wrote massively to teach something and to talk about the stench of tradition. There are beautiful things about our tradition. There are beautiful things about our culture. But some parts of this tradition, of this culture, some parts stink. Believe me. So I wrote Stench of Tradition. Why should a man be killed for the sake of another man? Anyway, long story short.
The same man enjoyed all the spoils of that office because of the status and the position he occupied, and was now cowardly not to fulfill the mission of that office.
I totally agree with you. But that doesn't erase the fact that should a man die.
But then, Deji, where does integrity stand?
I totally agree. What that poem is pointing out is this part of our tradition still stinks. Believe me, the man may have enjoyed, but in this 21st century, should a man be killed to escort another man to the afterlife?
Should a man, anyway, also accept to profit from likely death, and when death comes, he absconds?
Everyone is guilty. The man who accepted, the man who bestowed it upon him, and the one who is ready to kill him. Everybody. So it wasn't about castigating the people looking for Abubakar to kill, castigating Abubakar himself. Why would you? So anyway, long story short, and when this poem was ready, and this is another turning point in my life that led me to performance poetry. You know, there's page poetry, there's performance poetry, there's spoken word. I do both. I do page poetry, I do performance poetry, then I do spoken word as well. So I performed a Stench of Tradition on stage for the first time, and everyone was blown away.
There is this argument about art for the sake of art, and not art as a problem-solving experience. Art not necessarily addressing social problems. For a Nigerian society where there's mass neglect, where there's what I'm mature this afternoon to call mass infertility, is art for the sake of art, not mere masturbation, since society is seeking reproductive consequence.
So what I'm going to say is, first and foremost, art should be left to thrive in whatever form. And this is where you can get the best of art. Those who want to use art to address societal challenges, to attack societal ills, to speak truth to power, please let them do. And those who want to use art as a form of escape, first to clear their head, even if they are ranting, but once they are producing something tangible that can be called art, then I wouldn't call that a waste. Remember, some people feed on art. Some produce art. Some feed on art. The producers may be producing in vain, in their own thinking. I'm just ranting. I'm so sick and tired of this life. I'm just writing. But the next man feeding on that may be taking it as medicine, Remember, it may not happen in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It may be in 10 years. Once that work is called art, it will fulfill the purpose of art. And art doesn't have a single purpose. It has purposes. Means of entertainment, of education, information, even mass action, affirmative action. So eventually, I do not see, there's nothing called wasted art. There's no art for the sake of masturbation. Once the semen that is spilled is picked by an egg and fertilized in whatever form, let art thrive. That's all I'll say.
Deji, you know why I use that figurative expression? It's because I used mass infertility.
Yes.
Nigeria is at the crossroads. And time and again, the issue has been raised, where are the thinking minds? What are the men who could lace words together to speak to Nigeria's ignorance, to speak to Nigeria's waywardness, to speak to Nigeria's underperformance, to remind men that they ought to be men, and to remind people of material that life is not all material. After all, in this country, there was an Aminu Kano. I said to you out of stage that there was an Aminu Kano who bestrode Nigerian politics. By the time he exited, he had no house. That there was Dr. Michael Okpara, a medical doctor, who was premier of Eastern Nigeria. By the time he returned from exile in Ireland, he had no house. There was a Solomon Lar, who in my presence, Joshua Dariye, demolished his mud house to give him a place to put his head. There was a Sadana of Sokoto who was larger than life. By the time he was killed, he had only £6 in his account. That these are values that are running away from Nigeria. And the artists and the intellectual are busy entertaining. That's why I said, is it necessary to be involved in masturbation when there is mass barrenness?
I agree to what you have said to an extent, but I'll share my opinion on that. As long as we do not have a society totally void of intellectuals, then we still have something to hold on to. Believe me, at every point in human civilization, in human liberation, in human existence, there will be mere entertainers. There will be intellectuals. So eventually, there will be ideological people who would change ideology of other people. So eventually, everyone has their role. Those who do art for the sake of entertainment, it's fine. But the question we should be asking is the voice of those who use art to pass a message louder than the voice of those who use art as a mere form of entertainment? Maybe we should reverse it in this form. We should find a way to increase the volume for those who are using art to teach, to change. This is all I can say. But remember, a society still needs those who use art to entertain.
Okay, Deji, let me draw you into a specific.
Okay.
Today, the drums of division are so loud in Nigeria. The drums of mass murder are so loud in Nigeria. The drums of impunity are so loud in Nigeria. And the current worry is that the drums of to thy tents, O Israel, which if not well managed, could become the drums of war, that they are so loud. Is there any lesson in history that by your art and your poetry that we could draw from to warn us against this centripetal forces pulling and asking us to please everybody move in your direction? Is there any lesson in history?
There is, believe me. There will always be lessons in history. First, I think there's a Yoruba proverb that says, "Ba mobi anlo, amobi atimbo." If we do not know where we're going, we should know where we're coming from. And sometimes, to find your path into the future, you have to retrace your steps into the past. That can tell, oh, okay, I think I started out to get here. Okay, fine, let me stay on course. So eventually there are lessons, and I teach, I remind people of those lessons through my works. I teach those lessons. I call people's attention to those lessons.
Can we, because I saw you perform on stage.
Yes.
Incidentally, I asked my guys, let's do this under a greenwood tree so that we can be free to speak the way we want. Is there any of your works that can speak to the dangers of the present drums to Nigerians?
Yeah, there is. Okay, I'll do this poem titled "If the Weapon is Fired." It says a lot about the Nigerian Civil War and the memory of those who lost their lives and lost loved ones. Anyway, the sun rises again in the east, and I hear the same old chant, the chant of Exodus. To bring this chant to heal, I shall say a word of revelation. And before we flip the future into apocalypse, sing a song of lamentation to soothe the memory of Ikenna, that innocent boy, plucked off his mother's back, then dressed in military uniform twice his father's size and oversized boots he barely walked in. Before a bullet went through his head in the camp of child soldiers, where children were molded into weapons, branded freedom fighters, then forced to worship drugs in a rebellion they couldn't spell its intention. Let the morning dew of reason perch on restive spirits of those who have made even a whim into a prayer. May the sun not go down on your anger, for good fortune to continue to water that fertile land on which the sun rises in salute of hard work and harvest never cease. So we do not have to seek the peacemakers once again to quench the wildfire of rebellion. If a child never saw the horror of war, his father saw the night before, which now keeps the old man in his bed while the young and restless chant to the sound of Egbe. Let the father tell the legend of Signaturetv. The battle that ended before it began broke 1,000 guns, the spirit of a clan and the pride of men. Let men tell the legend of Signaturetv, so women can imagine losing a child. Let the mothers weave a fabric in love to veil hatred from the heart of their children, lest their sons be sent to war and daughters ravaged in rebellion. May it be burnt to ashes. The roller coaster of hatred will ride to the past to invoke the forgotten rage of Obunigwe. Let men of understanding run this race before it is too late. At the 9th mile, find Ugochi Nyelum, my mother. Ask for her wisdom. Tell her, I have been to the other side and back, seen the intangibility of life from the vantage point of reconciliation and the needless point of rebellion. And like she said, even the star of the north cannot take the glory of sunrise in the east. But the sun that rises in the east must set in the west. So, in isolation, melody cannot be heard. But when the woodpeckers beat the drum and the crickets sing a song, the music comes together. Together, we must forbid the ghost of yesterday from haunting tomorrow. So, at sunrise, I shall head to Asaba to mourn the massacre that left eternal scars, and go to Obosi To rule the memory of the battle that turned water to blood, I shall kiss 1,000 graves of those who paid with their lives, plead with their soul. Bikono, forgive the past. Bikono, eternal peace upon your spirit. I will speak to the land on which Nwobo's fortune was told, and the hope of Ikemba's war dashed. Jewess, so we do not tell your story twice. Jewess, at sundown, ask to be told a tale of fortune and a tale of doom. So you can tell the difference between hide and seek on green fields where butterflies caresses the cheeks, or the hide and seek on battlefields littered with corpses of family and friends. And for the ray of hope of a brighter tomorrow, not to be dimmed by hunger and disease as echoes of peace seen into another mournful chapter in history. Ifa Juna must not rest. Banjo must not sleep. Let the war heroes from great beyond whisper the lessons of their war through whispers of reason to those who were absent, and the young and restless, peeping into the barrel of loaded gun. If the weapon is fired, a fairy tale will not be told, and the generation unborn may yet bear the brunt.
Well, Deji, you are speaking to an angry people. You are speaking to a reactionary people. You are speaking to a situation, in fact, that could have a dire consequence. This, your poem, seems to agree with the lecture delivered in Washington in 2016 by a former governor of the Central Bank, Dr. Charles Soludo, at the World Igbo Day, in which he made a prediction that unless something was done to the Nnamdi Kanu factor, the Southeast and Nigeria could be facing a situation that could become unpleasant. But he also raised a question. He asked, where were the intellectuals? What was the debate like? Where are they to contribute to synthesizing of thoughts in such a manner that the table and conversation could solve a problem instead of the guns about which you've warned? But, Deji, I'm also to ask a question. Yes, the man who is beating the drum of war and the youth, ignorant youth, who is anxious to put his hands on the trigger and fire the first shot, may be a fool. But how more foolish is the person, or isn't the person, who is stoking the reason for this reaction? For indeed, they say for every action, there's an equal reaction. And a child cannot start crying when there are no hands beating it. So what do you say? Do you have any piece of work that can speak to these slapping hands, the inequity and the inequality they are complaining about? The convoluted federation they are complaining about? The refusal to accept intellect as necessary yardstick for running national affairs? Where is the competence and where is the skill? There is a piece of material I will play at this juncture. It was sent to me by a colleague just last Sunday, and it happened to be a piece of IPOP propaganda. But somehow, this piece reminded me of my secondary school days in Eastern Nigeria. I attended an all-boys Anglican grammar school in which we had boys from all over Nigeria. I want to still remember Ikriko. I want to remember Benjamin Olushola. I want to remember one other boy from today's Oyo State who was a Muslim. I want to remember Man White, who was from Kano. Let me mention others: Felix Onyeneke, Samuel Oprocha, AIC Yumunabike, many of my classmates. All of us, Nigerian young men, aspiring to be educated to lead Africa. I had elected then that I was going to I'll live my life in a science laboratory. Because I had a lecturer, a teacher, my physics teacher, Ododo, who ended up in NASA in USA. I had my geography teacher who became one of the world's best town planners. So we had ambition. And then suddenly, some, pardon my language, some ignorant, intellectually short soldiers decided to stall the whole of this through a coup, and then coup, and then coup. And then they introduced a divisive line of reasoning, line of thought. Today, the consequence of that war is that when I returned to Lagos in 1972, my classmates were managers. I was looking for a job as a clerk. I went to the university looking after 30 years, heading to 40. And I say so because of this piece of poem I just read that now. Is it also not necessary at this point, Deji, for me to enjoy that piece of work that also speaks to those who are causing disaffection and whose actions may cause a war?
Okay, yes. I'll do a poem titled Where Are Those Days? And before I do the poem, I think there's a Yoruba proverb that says, Baba mobi anlo, amobi atimbo. Now, which means if we do not know where we're going, we would know where we're coming from. So the implication of that is when you can trace your steps back, you can actually figure where you're going. You mentioned the days when Nigerians were Nigerians. Boys and girls from all over the country came together for a common purpose, for education, they saw a future. They wanted to be great. They wanted their country to be great. Those moments are dead. Let's call a spade a spade. And remember, your generation is away from the current reality. You can't carry placard anymore. You can't carry gun. You can't carry machete. Now, the generation doing this, I believe, majority of them are ignorant of those days. That at some point we were united. There was no from the east, north, south, central, middle belt. No. So we need to constantly remind ourselves, especially the generation raising the dust, that there was a time we were a nation, we were a brother's keeper. And the time can come back. Those days can be brought back, but only by us. So this will lead me to this poem, Where Are Those Days?
Just before you come into Where Are Those Days, Deji, there are people whose only value today is putting their hands on the chest. In fact, what they consider the dead man's chest filled with gold, and they eat Nigeria up with reckless abandon, warranting people of doubtful integrity who have eaten from those chests to become governors, yes, to become senators, yes, to become men to be considered in society, to the point that what this conversation you and I had this afternoon, they say, look, these are the rantings of people who cannot make it. And making it means eating off the national resource, the opportunities, the monies, the friendship, the familial relationships, and it pays them. Can you talk to them now?
So eventually, the generation of those who feed off the flesh of the people will soon leave, believe me. Writers are called prophets. Poets are called prophets. Sometimes when the writers get their words, or where they get their words, I would call it a spiritual realm. That is why today Bob Marley's words are still relevant. Fela's words are still relevant. They will still be relevant into the future. So what I'm saying is, those people will live. Believe me. Whoever keeps his hand on the treasure chest of the people and looting it dry, at some point would take them. If you don't take it off willingly, death will help you take it off. But a generation must be prepared to take charge when those are gone. And this is the generation someone like me would speak to. I've lost those who are keeping their body on the treasure chest. Let them be. But we need to prepare the generation to come and take over. To be mentally ready, to be ideologically ready, politically ready to do the right thing. So hence, where are those days? Can I verily bury this memory? Can I ever not rule over the days of glory? I think they are gone. Noble ways of good old days in this land, I guess, disappeared with the granite pyramids of Kano. The acid rain that withered fertile fields of brotherhood in Jos also killed compassion in the neighborhood of Lagos. Rails were built to connect cities and heart of folks who lived apart, I was told. Children who had little to eat would await travelers in Kaduna with open arms and offerings of tuwo masara, which they shared in elation to strangers from Owerri and Warri, weary and hungry on their journey to foreign lands they later called home. In search of where it all began, I groped in the darkness of days at hand. My foresight went hazy, so I stumbled on my father's broken heart, broken by stumbling blocks of unpaid pension and bonds inflicted by compatriots who made him queue in the sun to earn the peanut called pension. My father screamed as the pain grew sharper when the politicians mentioned this paid pension as an achievement of their government. So, for my hazy vision and the inadequate attention of my generation to the state of the nation, not asking the aging generation the direction to our destination. My father gave me punishment to write an epistle on how it all began. His opening line threw me off balance. What does not belong to a man, he said, a man should not take, except a woman in marriage. If not that option, then it is corruption. Life is a riddle, my son. The land bled when Ovoranwen was put in shackles. Heaven wept when Saruwiwa was laid to rest. Rest was his last word that sparked this unrest within me, that heroes of noble cause who have gone to rest may never rest in peace until this matter is laid to rest. My father fell asleep, so I picked his brain. So one day, I can pick my pen to write an epistle on how his generation fell asleep. The watchmen slipped into coma. Then, courage gave way to hypocrisy. Weakness mistaken for meekness. The warriors are in shackles of comfort. The just gagged with wealth. The lions shed their mane, watching chameleons take over the jungle as our conscience inches towards extinction. One day, I will write an epistle on how it all began, and begin the epistle with a question. How did we get here? How did we assemble this orchestra afflicted with musical myopia? However, did we climb this height of impunity from where we overlook the fact that we goaded ourselves into this labyrinth in which we have lost the path to utopia and found a cemetery of regrets to bury the relics of our days of glory? So I ask, where are the days of glory? Where are those days nothing went to waste? We made tangible things from things of little worth, like tins of milk recycled to containers for moi moi, and the big ones we used for storing detergents. Our leftover went to the cage of rabbits beside the vegetable garden, kept green by dung from the poultry farm that assured us eggs with our daily bread. How did we arrive at this creek of emptiness, where we bleed our land for fortune, spill oil on the future, burrow the earth for wealth, bury our inspiration within? Oil may fuel cars, I know, but inspiration will fuel those who will build cars. As imitation of one generation by another will determine the exaltation of a nation or her limitation from generation to generation. And this is not a legend. Inspiration is not a legend. Like those days were real. When empty cartons were remolded into space shuttles and exotic cars that carried our children to the land of their dreams on the shoulders of fathers who washed sweat of labor off their hands rather than blood of kindred, and mothers who needed not stay awake at night twisting and turning figures on public ledger. Where at those days, daughters were proud of fathers who were soldiers, and sons aspired to be soldiers. I'm afraid generals now handle cash than guns, and I've seen colonels amass wealth better than living up to their rank on the battlefield. Where at those days our national anthem was a prayer, each verse crafted the master key that unlocked doors in days of uncertainty. Virtue flowed in our veins, love expressed in purest ways, as bars of iron could not cage our dignity. Praise be the name of the Lord. Have mercy on your people. Just before the shepherds started to hustle flock with fancy billboards and the scriptures shrank into apps on the same tabs where we watch porn, were the days our offering went straight from the heart to the offering bowls on sacred altars, then carried further to orphans and widows and accounted for by church elders. I'm afraid on this new road to salvation, I see end-time ministries where offerings are swiped from debit cards to POS on glamorous altars, wired to holy accounts, and further to escrow for the offspring of the shepherds. Worse still, lavished on building colleges and private jets the congregation cannot afford. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Al-Amin. Astaghfirullah. As I long for those days to be back when peace was not haram, but what we made with our neighbors no matter their religion. Salat was a sure path to Al-Jannah. We would never kneel on sajada covered in blood.
Deji, I want to read you. Deji, thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. I want us to end this conversation this afternoon by facing certain realities. You're a young man. You've elected thought as your own weapon of engagement in a Nigerian society that seems to be looking for ways of salvation. I interjected at this point of prayer to also add my voice and say, may those to whom you are speaking hear and hearken. However, Deji, a last question. Do you ever feel lonely that when you make all this effort, yes, you're young, do you ever feel lonely that with all these efforts, when you look left and right, there are few of those prominent Nigerians, big men, who seem to be casting their vote for this your line of thought? Do you feel worried?
Yes, I do. And the reason is these are the people who can help change the narrative quickly, without affirmative action from the other side, from the oppressed or the repressed, without uproar, without fight.
Do you have a hope that sometime these men with their two hands on the national chest, resource chest, will ever raise their hands to say, look, equity is right?
I am very hopeful. I wouldn't be writing if I wasn't hopeful. Believe me, I am so hopeful that at some point, Nigerians will tell a different story. Rome was not built in a day. But there's another clause to it, which I have added. The people who built Rome never ran to Athens when the bricks were falling. They stayed back to build Rome. I believe so much that at some point, Nigeria will be better. Nigerians will be Nigerians before they are Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, and the rest. I am very, very hopeful. When you see the effort of people, when I look into the faces of people that are not from the same region I come from, and I see love, I see affection, I see, it gives me hope, it gives me joy. I am very, very hopeful. And I pray a few or more of us can retain that hope. All you need is a speck of it. And at some point, when all is dead, that speck of hope, if we can find it, it will come alive.
My last word this afternoon is, let those who have ears to hear, that can they kindly hear? Well, it's not always that I have the, let me call it the good fortune of encountering young men like this. I want to believe that sometime again, we'll bring Deji back, or somebody in his own kind of thought and idiom. My name remains Nwabueze Njoko. It never changes, and the conversation never ends. Good afternoon.